This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 123.
And all of that stuff you can absolutely spend your time on. There's always going to be a new thing to spend your time on that isn't, are my children learning? There's always going to be something new. There's never not going to be. And so it is a choice. And so in our district, the choice was very clear. We're not going to focus on that. It still has to be handled. There are people whose job it is to handle it, and their responsibility is to deal with it. And if they need something, they'll contact, but otherwise, they go do that. But for the rest of us, our job is educating children, and that remains the focus.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Matt. Don't forget the introduction, Rogers. Matt, I turned the lights off. I was about to head upstairs, and you reminded me we needed to record an intro, and it was not out of frustration in any way. Our show was so good that I just completely forgot that we still had to add 2 minutes before it because I just want our listeners to jump right into the conversation.
Couldn't say it better myself. And how perfect. Show 123, an educator's dream. Ken, we have been really fortunate to have some incredible educators that we don't have the privilege to talk to. And AJ may be top of that list. Really just... So we'll get into this quite a bit. But AJ deals with all the people that we assume have brutally difficult jobs. And he has masterminded a position where he supports them and allows them to be their full potential, which then allows his teachers to reach their full potential, which then leads to the kids reaching their full potential. I mean, when we talk about the ripple effect, boy, oh boy, is it so exciting to hear someone with so much responsibility just speak our language. And just, I get so amped up for the kids in the districts that he works in because they are just getting the best, like the best in education in his hands.
Yeah, they truly are. And like you said, he's scaffolding and supporting school board all the way down to the classroom teacher and everyone in between.
And the students directly. Yeah.
And the students directly, right? All the way down to the students, you're right. And he works with students and he coaches school boards in the same district. And what I love about the conversation is when we ask him questions, and we ask him tough questions, and he acknowledged that afterwards and said how much he appreciates that. Is he at times, especially if you're a teacher listening to this, at times we're going to be talking about the school board, but I promise you that his answer trickles down to you. And even when I felt like it didn't, and I asked explicitly, or you asked explicitly, give us more, he gave us more. So you're going to hear this conversation and you are going to be able to apply what you're hearing, whether you are a building leader, a classroom teacher, or a central office administrator, because of his experience and his perspective and his knowledge. He is not skirting the surface on any of these answers. He is giving high quality, in-depth, deep down answers to these. And that's what I think you and I loved about him most, is when we ask the tough questions and we want people to dig 3 inches deeper than they typically do. And our guests have done such a great job with that because we've had so many amazing guests. He dug 6 inches deep, and he wasn't afraid to do it. And just high quality answers, high quality conversation from beginning to end. So I really don't want to delay it any further. I want to jump right into our conversation with AJ.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, AJ. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hey, gentlemen. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So kick things off for us, short and sweet. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and what your experience in education has been like so far.
I'm coming at you from the great state of Texas, H-Town, Houston. And the things that I spend a lot of my time doing are working with schools to help them improve their systems at the central office level, working with schools to help them focus on improving their behavioral support systems at the campus level, and working with school systems to help them improve the quality of governance at the board level.
Excellent. So I'm really excited about this conversation and to hear a lot about instruction and how we can improve the things that are happening on a daily basis in classrooms from your perspective. So to start things off, what has shifted, let's say, over the last 10 years in terms of what quality instruction looks like and what we should be striving to provide for our students in our classrooms that maybe wasn't apparent or wasn't at the forefront, in the late 90s, early 2000s?
What was not at the forefront? I'm thinking of a time when I had the opportunity to teach computer programming middle schoolers. And as I'm reflecting on it, I'm realizing that there was not a lot of collaboration or oversight. So I think I did an okay job. And so my students went on to be computer programmers in their careers. So hopefully I had some impact. But as I'm reflecting on it, it was pretty much, here's a room, here's some students, go to work. I developed my own lesson plans, certainly, but curriculum and everything. And as I reflect on it right now, I would never want a teacher in my district to have that same experience. I would hope that they would come in, they'd feel like they were part of a team, they'd feel like they were supported, that there were materials already for them, but that their job is to improve upon those materials if they find something that they feel like isn't working for their students, but that preferably more of their time can be focused on how do I need to deliver these materials and where are my students at and how do they need me to show up for them today. I would rather teachers spend more time in that space than scouring teacher pay teachers looking for materials for Monday morning. Like that's not what I would want for any of my teachers. That I want them to experience the level of support that allows them to experience the craft as joy and as a profession of love for students, not a profession of endless paperwork and homework assignments for the teacher just to be able to do the job. And so that difference, I suspect that I'm not super alone in that experience. And and so I would certainly say that in my district right now, that one of the biggest shifts that we've made in the past year or so is really creating accountability systems for our principals around the quantity and quality of support that they're providing for teachers, so that it's not just kind of throw a teacher out there and hope it all works out. But what's the quality of observation that you're engaged in, not of the punitive sort, of the how do we help you be the best version of yourself sort. Another thing that we focused in on is not only the quality of the support you're providing for teachers, but the quantity. And so our expectation right now is a fairly new expectation, less than 2 years old, is we expect as a principal that you should spend at least 60% of your minutes every single week without fail in the classroom supporting instruction. 60% of your time. I don't know what's true for you all, but that's been a whole different game plan for us, and so it forces the principals to think differently about what is the job, what are the pieces that I have to hold, what are the pieces I have to delegate, what are the things that I have to spend my time getting better at because this is central to how we serve children, versus things that are not where I should be focusing my energy. I feel like it has been incredibly common for the job of principal to be building manager, keep the budget on time, keep the HR on time, keep the paperwork on time. And if you have some spare time left over when you're not at central office in a meeting, hopefully you can drop in for the last 5 minutes of a PLC. That's just not honoring teachers, and it certainly isn't honoring students.
Right. It's a similar analogy to, like you were saying, teachers focusing on prepping materials, prepping the curriculum, and delivering content, and not spending as much time thinking about the students in front of them, and now shifting to, I'm going to focus on the students in front of me and how I can engage them with the curriculum I'm supposed to teach. Same with the principal. I'm going to stop all of these managerial things being the forefront and then focus on teachers. I'm going to focus on teachers and then figure out systems for those managerial pieces.
I guess the first question, and maybe can you speak to the structure specifically in Texas? You know, I feel like my principal, who does as great of a job as I could ever hope to do in such a tough role, but her support is obviously the district admin and her, I don't know if I would call it PLN, but you know, the group that she can reach out to for support. And it sounds like you're in a role where you are strategically placed to be a level of guidance, a level of support that I don't know if is universal. Maybe it's just something that my district doesn't have, but larger districts do. But it sounds incredible that you are so intentionally speaking towards how to support principals that then trickles down to students. Because as you mentioned, the job of a principal, honestly, in my opinion, is probably the hardest job in education because they are the stopgap. It's kind of like an ES teacher from teaching wise. When I, as a regular ed teacher, can no longer handle the behaviors of a student, I hand that student off and say, hey, expert, come on in,
Right.
you know, you get to save the day. So can you kind of speak to maybe that structure, how you build in your time, how many people you're servicing in that kind of position? And I don't want to diminish when I say trickle down, because we often hear that and say it doesn't actually lead to change. It seems like with intention, it is really supporting and making a difference in your schools.
Yeah. So my particular, well, let me come from the other direction. The job of our teachers is to support our students. The job of our principals, and there's this network of folks, is to support our teachers. And so you certainly have instructional coaches. We also have master teachers, folks who time is intentionally pulled out for them to be able to be of service to other teachers who are still newer in the craft. But then we also have a person whose sole job is essentially school improvement, and is really a lot around working with our principals on their observation and feedback skills to really make sure that it's dialed in. Common examples are they accurately identifying the extent to which students are experiencing on grade level material, for example. Part of the challenge of leaving teachers without the resources they need is that you start to bring into question, are the students experiencing on grade level material or behind grade level material? But part of that, in our thinking, has to live in the feedback, observation and feedback cycle between the principal and the rest of the support team and the teacher, to really identify what exactly you're trying to teach and what's the appropriate level of materials, and where do you have what you need, and where is something that we can go out and find for you, that we can try to help get you that additional support, as opposed to you having to be alone at 11 o'clock at night looking on Pinterest to see what you can find. And, and then it's a superintendent and the board's job to support that team, of making sure that those folks who are the frontline support team for the principals have all of the things that they need and have a clear path to accomplish their objective of supporting our principals and helping them level up, helping them figure out, how do I redesign my day so that I'm spending 60% of my minutes in classrooms. Which, again, if you have folks who've been in the craft for 30 years and have never experienced a principal spending 60% of their time in the classroom, it's not that they don't want to get there, it's often they just don't know how to get there. And so having that full support network that helps support what shifts are you going to need. Let's brainstorm this together. I'm not suggesting I have the answer, but let's all come together and think this through and see if we can collectively find the answer. And then my role then is to provide coaching for the board and the superintendent largely. And so it's several steps away, but all of us have to be obsessively focused on the same thing. We have to have the same set of metrics that we're looking at, the same set of expectations that we're looking at, the same understanding, the same calibration around what does quality observation look like, what does quality feedback look like. I think we started the school year with putting all the principals in a room and playing a video saying, okay, here's the rubric for quality observation. We're going to play a video. Everybody watch it. Now score the quality of that observation. Is it a 1? Is it a 10? Somewhere between. Then everybody finishes watching the video. Okay, well, that was definitely a 3. Well, I thought that was an 8. Okay, well, actually, it was a 5. Let's talk about why it was a 5. All right, let's watch the next video. And again and again and again until you get the sense of calibration. Because what also doesn't work is for a teacher to work at one campus and get one set of coaching around what does effective look like, and then go across town and now teach at another campus and get completely contradictory feedback. Like that's not helping teachers grow. And so making sure that all those systems are in place and that all those supports are in place, that's the high level view that I have the joy of bringing to the conversation, and just looking and say, okay, where are we moving our expectations a little bit more and a little bit more? In each month, I look at the data to figure out, have we nudged in the direction that we said that we're going to nudge? And there's nothing magical about it. It's just digging in and doing the work week after week after week after week. And the results that we've seen is that our teachers are out here doing amazing work. We're seeing significant improvements in student outcomes. Even in times last year when others were on the decline, our scholars were on the rise because our teachers were getting it done. And so it's exciting to watch what's possible when you create an increasingly aligned system that's focused on how do we get teachers the supports that they need, and make sure that at every level of the organization that it's dialed into ensuring that occurs.
AJ, Ken, can I just make a comment and then please ask the question? We had a guest on recently who had a dream job. And AJ, it sounds like you have a dream job
all the way.
In the sense that, like, I would imagine going into admin, you sell yourself, I'm leaving the classroom, maybe I've done a coaching role, whatever the case may be, but I leave that position with the intention of having a greater impact on classrooms, with coaching, with guiding, feeling like a master teacher and providing further support. That's what we all have the pipe dream of. I want to have a bigger ripple effect.
And that's not what it winds up happening.
Yeah, well, and that you have to navigate that kind of challenge of what is the logistics that have to get done, and do they get in the way? Up today, I just kept the building upright, like it didn't crumble. And then I just have to imagine that when you show up at a principal's door, it is just a sign of productivity and support and care and accountability more than anything. Because I could imagine if you're floating out there as a principal that doesn't, like, we say it at a lower level, teachers teach with different styles, but leaders lead with different styles, and trying to find 1 out of 25 in a building is the principal. To find someone that you can really depend on has got to be super challenging in its own right. So you coming in and accountable in a positive way of keeping their priorities in the right direction. It's got to be such exciting, hard conversations that you get to have on a daily basis that stem from the same end goal: consistency and high quality for kids. Simply put, right? And that is, what is the principal doing? What are the teachers doing? How can you make that a reality and then spread that out across the district? I think it's a fascinating thing that, again, can back to back dream roles of when we get into education, impact makers. It feels like you are an impact maker, which is awesome.
Well, I should clarify one piece about that, though, is that mine is also inherently a temporary role. So it is definitely a dream role in that there's an impact I get to have, but a large part of my job is to help make sure that systems are in place that are working and that are sustainable, and then walk away. Like, it's not intended that I be present forever. It's intended that I be present for a season, long enough to help things get to a place where our students are getting what they deserve, and we're able to demonstrate that. And so when I arrived at the district 2.5 years ago now, that we just weren't fulfilling on our potential at that time, and so we had really low ratings in our governance systems, and in our financial systems, and our academic systems. And now that's not the case. Moving from F ratings toward B ratings in each of these systems, and God willing, continuing an upward trend when all the results come in over the summer. That allows me confidence that the systems are in fact in place, that it's not accidental, that we've actually produced a system that is responsive to the needs of students and responsive to the needs of teachers in a way that can reliably allow people to be the best version of themselves year after year after year. And yeah, to your point, that is an absolute dream role. I love being able to wake up every day and feel like I get to fight for kids in the various venues that I do so.
Absolutely. I have a similar mindset often when I'm working with teachers as an instructional coach. The goal that we're moving towards, whether I'm model teaching first or co-teaching with them, but the idea is that at some point, what we accomplish together continues without my presence. So I'm constantly trying to find new teachers to support, and then also create the mindset that I shouldn't be here at some point. And that when is different teacher to teacher and goal to goal. So I would love to hear some suggestions you have for our leaders that are listening to this, hearing this 60% and thinking, how is that possible? And we also have a large majority of our listeners that are teachers. And we've had a few conversations recently related to student-centered learning. And a lot of that, I think, boils down to the mindset of the teacher, finding the way to shift that mindset to be okay with flipping the way things happen, the order of the lesson, or giving more opportunity to students first and then seeing how to fill in the gaps. And so I have a feeling there are concrete ways to accomplish this 60%, but also I'm guessing there's a little bit of a mindset piece too for our leaders. So any suggestions you have for a leader that's listening to this and say, well, this isn't a district initiative, but this is my goal. I want to do this next year when we come into the new school year.
So a couple of different things. I'm going to shoot all over the place here. It'll sound like, but it all does come back together to your inquiry. So the first step in my support to the district was not to start with the principals, even though literally on my first day on the job, the first thing I did was call all the principals and say, hey, check it in, want to introduce myself, how are things going, what can I do to be supportive? I'm here, call me if you need me, this is my mobile, please don't look for a job. It was like, that was day one. Like definitely my very first series of calls. And I'm grateful to all the principals, like, I'm sorry, who is this? You're who? Why are you calling me? He's like, well, I'm new to the family, here to serve. But I didn't actually start with that end of the system. I actually started at the other end with the school board. And one of the initiatives that we put in place was to have a school board that would spend at least 50% of its minutes every month without fail monitoring progress relative to our goals for student outcomes. So imagine, I don't know how many school board meetings you've attended, but I, you'll have to take my word for it then. Most of them are not focused on our students learning. Uh, that's a whole nother thing.
I plead the fifth.
but that's the reality, and I say that I'm involved with a project right now called the Effective School Board Initiative. It's just effectiveschoolboards.org, and we're literally coding school board members from across the country. So when I say that I watch a lot of school board meetings and literally code them minute by minute by minute to identify exactly what are the boards doing with each minute at a time, I mean that literally. That most of their minutes across the country are not being focused on our students learning and not being focused on other things. And so the first step was, can we get the board to a point where its minutes are focused on children in a powerful way? And so first we have to design that, we have to coach for that, we have to redesign systems and policies for that, and push and push and push. And I'm proud to say it's been months since the board was below 50%. That reliably month in, month out, the board effectively focuses 50% or more of its time dialed into our children learning relative to the goals that we've set for student learning. And so not focused on our adults implementing things that we want them to implement. No, we're going one step beyond that. Our children learning as a result of what adults are implementing. That's the thing that the board is focused on with 50% of its time. Once you get the board focused that way, there's a major effect that it has is whatever the board is focused on, that's what the superintendent and central office will be focused on. So if the board is focused on, hey, how come the grass at the middle school is an inch too high? How come we haven't filled in the pothole at XYZ elementary school? Like if these are the things that the board is focused on, and I'm not making things up, I'm just repeating things I've heard, then that's what the central office winds up spending its minutes on. So remember, this is a game of minutes. I'm going to get down to minutes of instruction. But before we get there, let's talk about how the board is spending its minutes. Once we've got the board focused in 50% of its time, then it's time to nudge to the superintendent. How can, in the Office of Superintendency, can there be a focus of at least half, preferably 60% of the time of our senior leaders actually spent directly offering supports to campuses? Rather than pulling people off of campuses, maybe we need to show up on the campus, and that's where we need to be. And then taking it to the next level, how can we ensure that principals are spending at least 60% of their time actually not hanging out in the office, but actually in the classroom, directly providing supports, observation, feedback, co-teaching, modeling, whatever, to teachers in the classroom. And then asking your teachers, how can we constantly dial up the percentage of instructional minutes that are really dialed in to exactly what our intention was? And what do we need to accomplish that? What additional supports do you need from us to accomplish that? That's one of the reasons. One of the other things that I spend a lot of my time on right now is student-led restorative practices. Is that the high schools that I'm working with to deploy this, what it is a system of saying, what would be possible if we handed responsibility for a lot of our behavior discipline issues to a group of students who will be specifically trained to address those in a restorative fashion, so that when little AJ makes a profoundly foolish decision, instead of little AJ going to the AP's office to get that sorted out, that instead they go to a group of students. Well, this does a few things. One, if our teachers and campus staff know that when little AJ acts up, we have a place for them to go where they're going to go through a full-throated conversation about what was the harm that you created, invite little AJ to take responsibility for it. What is it that you need to do to repair the harm? How can you be so accountable for it that not only you own that you created the harm, but come up with a plan complete with SMART goals for how you're going to repair the harm? what we're trying to accomplish there is that in those schools, when we get this up and running, that those minutes that are being spent really processing through the behavior and turning behavior into a learning experience, which is what any teacher or any assistant principal would want to do, but that we don't see it happening because folks just have too much other things to do. That what if little AJ screws up, I'd really like to just sit down and have that 30 or 45-minute conversation to help coach them through that. I just don't have time because I got another 35 kids coming to my classroom in 5 minutes, and then I got to go cover a lunch. And so offloading as much of that as possible to a group of students, not only are we helping them learn critical skills about how to create responsibility and accountability among their peer group, not only are we giving little AJ the spaciousness he needs to really reflect on his behavior, take responsibility for it, and come up with a plan to repair the harm that he's created to the learning community. But in the moment that students are leading all of that, adults are freed up to do other things. Teachers are freed up to teach. APs are freed up to help with the building management task and supporting instruction so that the principal can be freed up to actually dial in. And so I say all that to suggest, like, it sounds like it's a bunch of different disparate things, but they're all intended to come together in an interwoven web to say, how can we make sure that we're dialing in to delivering the supports that students need and delivering the supports that teachers need? And how can we make every single minute count by leveraging every resource we have and making a demand on folks that we're going to make every minute count from the boardroom to the classroom?
Holy cannoli. Well, I mean, I feel like as, three people that share very similar perspectives on a lot of these attributes, like that sounds, again, it sounds like when you set a mission statement and you see it come to fruition, right? Like we had a guest that changed, instead of using the term goals, they changed it to intentions, because an intention is something that you are going to work towards. You may not always achieve it, but the moment that switch went in my head, I was like, that is an incredible minute switch, but it's just beautiful to be so diligent in seeing it turn from what are we here for, where are we starting, and where are we going. Obviously, you're in communication with school boards. Gosh, it has to be thrilling to watch all those school board meetings and document
it.
Yeah.
Just the joy of my life right there.
Exactly. So school boards, obviously, central administration, principals, etc. One of the things that I'm fascinated by, and this is just, again, I can only speak from my own experience, is excuse makers. And I don't mean to pin that on anyone, but there is a time and place that if we have monthly data check meetings, grade level meetings that we meet with our principal at minimum as a whole team, in addition to what we're doing individually. And I can make those 40 minutes lead to nothing. I can say, oh, well, Bobby had this going on, and this day, they were sick, and that must be a contributing factor to a score that wasn't acceptable. And needless to say, at the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of times we're judged by what did the score say? Black and white, pure, what does that data say? And if it's not higher than it was before, you need to explain it. So how do you navigate when, we have a litany of possible options that you want to choose, the Rolodex of, COVID and virtual learning and all these different things recently. How do you transition the stakeholders that you're working with, transitioning from contributing factors to challenges to the accountability, and what is some of those hurdles related to that?
Yeah, but I think a lot of this is about the conversation that we're having. At any given time, what's the conversation that we're having? And so, for example, the school board in my district didn't spend hardly any time ever talking about the pandemic.
Hmm.
No, I've watched a lot of school board meetings. What I just said is completely different from what most people. Most people spent 2 years mired in masks and vaccines and PPE and all these other things. You can go watch last 2 years in my district. That was almost never the conversation. We certainly didn't have our heads in the sand. There was clarity that there was a pandemic on, but that was never the conversation. The conversation remained on how are we driving performance improvements for our students? What is the measurable evidence that our students are experiencing the quality of instruction that they deserve week in and week out? And so the conversation never shifted away from that. In so many places, I think to the strong detriment of children, the conversation shifted away from are children receiving the quality of instruction that they deserve and toward how are we managing the pandemic. And I know why people did it. And so I don't want to be overly critical about this, but I do want to differentiate. That was a choice that people made. And it's not the only option that was available. You could also take the option that we took, which is we just didn't discuss it. We did say, look, here are the folks in the school system who are responsible for it. You all need to go do your jobs and figure it out. And if there's something you need from us, come talk to us. But generally speaking, only the people for whom that was the centerpiece of their job was at the centerpiece of their job, and that was never the centerpiece of my job. So I never really talked about it much. It just wasn't a part of my day-to-day focus. Nor was it that
And sorry to cut you
else.
off, AJ, but that mindset now, I'm sure, is only perpetually helping even more, because what you see in school boards across the country right now is the political spectrum has now become part of
And
the school
all of
board
that stuff
conversation.
you can absolutely spend your time on. There's always going to be a
Right.
new thing to spend your time on that isn't,
Right.
are my children learning? There's always going to be something new. There's never not going to be. And so it is a choice. And so in our district, the choice was very clear. We're not going to focus on that. It still has to be handled. There are people whose job it is to handle it, and their responsibility is to deal with it. And if they need something, they'll contact, but otherwise they go do that. But for the rest of us, our job is educating children, and that remains the focus. And I think that's part of what contribute to, in a time last year, we saw double-digit literacy gains across the district at a time when other people were struggling to remain flat or declining. But I think what you choose to focus on is absolutely essential. And so a lot of other people chose to focus on those things. We did not. And I think our children are better off for it.
And that mindset and that choice, everyone has
Everybody has a choice.
that decision to make, regardless of the position you are. Classroom teachers, you have that choice. Building leaders, you have that choice. You can make those decisions. And to put a teacher hat on, to try to create an analogy around this, it's scripted programs. Scripted programs, new curriculum becomes something that teachers hang their hat on, and sometimes they choose to emphasize all of their time in voicing their frustration in having to use this or struggling with it. And yes, it's something that you have to use because your district is adopting that or moving towards that. But you can choose to look at it and say, okay, this is what I'm being asked to use. How can I use this to best instruct the students sitting in front of me? And it doesn't mean that you're disobeying your district. It doesn't mean that you're not doing what you're asked to do, but you are using the resources provided to you to do what is best for the student sitting in front of you. And I really do believe what you're saying, that is a mindset choice and a decision that we can make. We just have to overtly think about that. So you've mentioned multiple times evaluations with your principals and its impact on instruction in your classrooms. And I think a lot of times evaluations can be looked at the same as a state test. It's something that happens once a year. That's a score that doesn't measure what happens on a daily basis. And so I would love to know how your teachers and your building leaders have reframed these formal evaluations, and how it's become a positive experience over and over again for your teachers, and how it is impacting teaching and learning in the
Well,
classrooms.
it's certainly a cultural journey. And as I visit with teachers and principals across the district, you certainly would not have unanimous agreement that that this is a positive, that this is a wonderful thing yet. I mean, so we're certainly on a journey together. That being said, again, I want to emphasize how the holism of adult focus the adult focusing on student outcomes across the entire spectrum of the school system, from the boardroom to the classroom. And so when you talk about what is our relationship with evaluation, what you're really meaning is what is our relationship in the associated systems with continuous improvement, or that's what I hope people would be focusing on. And so if the purpose isn't how do we issue an annual evaluation of someone, but instead the purpose is how are we continually helping people live into their potential and get stronger and stronger, that has to be both the intention and visible at every level of the organization. And so again, I'll start at the boardroom and then move to the classroom. One of the things the board did is pulled out a new instrument for evaluating its performance. It's a 0 to 100 point scale. When I first arrived at the districts 2.5 years ago, one of the first things I asked the board to do was self-evaluate using this instrument. They did. The board gave themselves a 12 out of 100. I don't know what your scoring system is where you live, but we call that an F in Texas. And so that was the board in a public meeting saying, we're looking at this rubric around what does it look like for a board to be intensely focused on improving student outcomes. And we're giving ourselves a 12 out of 100 that we're publicly acknowledging. We're not there yet. And here's the key thing. We aren't saying that makes us bad board members, but we are saying that our behavior isn't yet where we want it to be. And so then what there is to do is we got to think through what are we going to do next week and the next week and the next week, so that the next time we have this conversation, that we are a step further down the road than we are. Instead of waiting for 12 months before that, what we decided to do is have the board self-evaluate every 3 months. So every 3 months, it would pull out this 0 to 100 rubric and say, okay, now where are we at? We went from 12 points to about 25 points. Okay, yay, 25. Still feels like an F, but it's not 12 points. And so the thing to focus on isn't the summative rating that it's an F. That's where a lot of people's brains will go. The thing to focus on is we more than doubled our score. We more than doubled where we were compared to last time, in terms of are we living into the possibility for our students. And then every 3 months, come back again and come back again and come back again. So what's critical there is we're not doing an annual evaluation of once a year we'll trot out this punitive rubric and figure out. No. The name of the game is how are we getting a little bit better in these real short cycles. How are we using data, and not to beat anybody up, not to say, well, you people are horrible because you are only at 25. No, let's celebrate that we have seen significant improvement over 3 months ago, and then let's come up with this, hatch a plot for what we're going to be down the road. That exact same approach, then once the board got really crisp about that, then apply to the superintendency as well. Okay, how instead of evaluating the superintendent once per year, how can we do a micro evaluation of the superintendent every single month? So every single month we grab one little slice of student performance that the superintendent is responsible for and do a deep dive in that. You can actually go watch it. The one last month was phenomenal. You go watch it, you'll see the vast majority of the meetings focused on monitoring student performance and celebrating student performance that you see, but it also serves as a micro formative short cycle assessment of the superintendent. And again, all of these are happening in public. So what we're saying is we're all focused around the exact same set of student performance metrics from the boardroom all the way to the classroom. We're looking at the same data. We're looking at it different ways. There's a difference, from street data than satellite data, but fundamentally we're looking at the same aligned set of data. And we're saying that we will publicly evaluate ourselves on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, because we want to create a safer culture around what does it mean to self-evaluate, that this is just how we continuously improve. It's not a negative thing. Nobody's getting beat up. If you watch the board meetings, there are places where the data is not where we want it to be. Nobody gets cussed out. We certainly want to know what worked, what didn't work, and how we're going to improve. But that's the nature of the conversation, not why did you screw this up. And so spending the time to build out systems like that in the boardroom and the superintendency and then with the cabinet members, then you cascade that exact same thinking to your principals, where we're not checking in once per year to see how principals are doing. We essentially are checking in on a weekly basis, because remember, the expectation is I spend 60% of your minutes every week. every single week we want to see 60%. And so really checking in essentially on a weekly basis. How are things going with you growing in the areas that you want to grow as a leader of this building? And what supports do you need? Or what worked over the last, what didn't work? And not what didn't work as in you're a horrible principal, but what didn't work, and what are we going to do about it? What supports do you need to actually make a difference? With the intention that then matriculates how principals are treating teachers, because the part of the theory of action here is that if I want my teachers treated with dignity in a continuous improvement cycle, my principals have to be treated with dignity in a continuous improvement cycle. But if I want my principals to feel that way, then senior central office staff have to be treated that way. If I want central office to be treated that way, the superintendent has to be treated that way. And if I want the superintendent treated that way, the board has to engage in that work itself. And so there's, again, this holism of how do we create systems where this is just the culture of how we do things here, where there's this continuous improvement. We're looking at data. We're taking a cold, hard look. It's a very aligned set of data. Everybody knows what the scoreboard looks like. If you actually look at the boardroom, we literally have a scoreboard on the wall that shows exactly where we're winning and where we're not yet winning. The data is literally on the wall, and it's posted there for all to see. So when you come into the board meeting, oh, okay, on goal number 1, yeah, it looks like we've sagged a little bit. Okay, goal number 2, oh, we're up on goal number 2. Everybody knows what the scoreboard looks like. But the scoreboard there isn't as an act of shame. That is a failure of leadership. The scoreboard is there as an act of love. Here's what we're all committed to. And anytime we find something that's not working, that's just data that tells us, okay, great. So what are we going to shift in order to get closer to the aspirations we have for our students?
So I just absolutely love that from the top down and the holistic view of that. If I am a building leader listening to this and those supports are not in place, but I don't want to wait for those supports to be there or possibly never be there. What can I do in my school with my teachers to reframe the culture of this pursuit of student learning and student outcomes and make the evaluations more of a coaching experience and less of a punitive experience? Are there things that I can specifically do as a
I think
to change that mindset?
I think anyone can do this work, even if it's not happening at a system level. I think the problem is it's just hard. So if I'm trying to spend 60% of my time as a building leader directly supporting my teachers in the classroom and really trying to, on a week-by-week basis, work with my coach to help me as a principal improve my observation and feedback skills, if I'm trying to do all of that, but then I'm still being pulled out of my building for a meeting a day to go to central office because they can't be bothered to come to my building to talk to me. If I'm still being expected, hey, the only thing I ever hear from the superintendent is, how's your budget? How's your budget? How's your budget? Like, I can do all those things. It's just harder. This is why starting with an aligned system, changing the behavior, the boardroom and the superintendent's office, in the central administrative offices, makes it so much easier for principals to live out what they'd rather be doing anyway. And so I think anyone can do it. It's just really, really challenging to do so in a vacuum when you're the only one on that particular journey. I think this is part of why we see so many building leaders fail, not because they didn't have a clear vision, but they just didn't have the ability to keep all of the noise at bay so they could implement the vision. And so I see part of my job is how do I minimize the noise in the system to maximize the signal. And so, yeah, I think people can do this. I think they can pursue it, and people can certainly reach out. I'm always happy to share about the experiences we've had, connect them with some of our district leaders, and they can hear their stories from the different levels of the organization, and encourage them to do everything they can to fight for their children in their context. I'd encourage them to get absolutely maniacal about monitoring their minutes, how every single minute is spent, week over week over week, and try to identify what is the optimal way that I want to spend my minutes. Okay, so I spent 10% of my minutes in an optimal way last week? How do I spend 15% of my minutes in an optimal way? And so I'd encourage people to think about minute by minute by minute, just get maniacal about how am I investing my minutes? What's the optimal way that I'd want to? And literally track it week by week by week to figure out how am I spending my time. I think anybody could do that. It's just beyond a certain point, it gets really hard to do if the rest of the organization that is putting downward pressure on you to not focus your minutes in the ways that matter most for children.
Right. And something to consider is look at your change your denominator. If you have that pressure from upper administration where you have to leave campus to go to meetings,
maybe it's not going to be 60.
So,
maybe it's going to be 30.
Right. Or look at your total minutes of your time, right? So if you have just say 100 hours in a week, I know it's not exactly that, but you have 100 hours in a week, but you have 20 hours that you can't do
I can't do anything about.
Make your denominator the 80 and focus your 60% on what you can control to really help you work towards that. So aside from, again, this idea of this holistic piece, I can already see how teachers in your district are going to be more comfortable with analyzing data, analyzing their own growth, looking at student achievement in their classroom and how to improve their practice because they're seeing that self-evaluation come.
No one wants to be the only person in the entire system held accountable for our children succeeding. And the more that leaders can make it transparent that actually I'm on the hook for this as well, and here's where I'm succeeding and here's where I'm not succeeding, the more leaders are willing to have an open and transparent conversation about their performance, the easier it is for the people they're leading to feel comfortable having an open, transparent conversation about their performance.
Totally. And just to speak to that real quick, like my wife and I are both fourth grade teachers in a very small district. Every year that our state testing results come back, I want us both to do well, and I want her to do a little bit better than me. It just makes my household all the bit nicer, right? But the worst case scenario is, if there's a discrepancy, she and I are teaching essentially the same thing, and the effectiveness is not there. So it's a tough conversation to have, obviously. Hence why I talked about excuses early on. But I guess one of the things that I struggle with is, Ken, I know that you have experience on the business end. And AJ, you obviously have experience interacting with recognizing that a school district is a business, managing budgets, kind of having quotas and goal setting and achieving those and stakeholders in it. For someone, whether that's the teacher level or what have you, who got into education because it wasn't business. I don't have to worry about business tactics. It feels like the enforcement of academic standards. Oh my goodness, what a terrible thing for education. But that translated to high stakes testing and all the things that we've seen become high priority in education. Where do you feel like is a division, if there is still, in business from classic education? And the one other point, Ken, you can kind of chime into this as well. Ken, as a systems guy, a system for success is something that you set up that was a business attribute with the empathy of education. Because you still had to make it work for kids. You couldn't be boss, get it done like some cutthroat positions are. So kind of like navigate that. I don't know if there's a real question there or if anything pops off.
No, I totally get you on this. I actually don't particularly enjoy the analogy at all of business rigor, brought into education. They're just such different domains that I just don't enjoy the analogy. But I'll lean into a little bit to kind of humor the inquiry. Some distinctions here is that they're both human organizations. A business is a human organization. A school is a human organization. But they have very different foci. Like the focus of a business is to, generally speaking, improve the bottom line. Is how are revenue exceeding expenditures a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more each year. And so the measure of was a business effective is pretty straightforward. In a large corporation, we say earnings per share. It's a pretty straightforward metric. The school system is an institution of love, period. If the children don't experience love, they're not going to learn as effectively. If the teachers don't experience love, they're not going to have as much of a wellspring of love to make available for the children who need to experience love. If the principals aren't experiencing love, then they'll have less of a wellspring of love to share with their teachers who have less of a sense of love. I mean, this is an interconnected human system, but it has to be able to exude love and caring at every stage of the organization. Or said differently, don't expect teachers to provide for students that which is never being provided to teachers. Like, we can't expect teachers to consistently and reliably behave in a restorative fashion if they're being treated in a punitive fashion. And so that's a distinction here, is that if you don't behave in a loving way, I don't know how much the $100 bill cares in a business. If you don't behave in a loving way, I do know how much a kindergartner cares about that. And so that is a key distinction that can't be lost. And so, are there some various principles between businesses and school systems that are valuable to learn from each other? Absolutely. But the core currency of the realm is just a very different thing. The currency of businesses is money. The currency of school systems is love. Now, love is necessary. It's also insufficient. I mean, nobody's going to love their way to literacy. Like, you actually have to be taught. You have to be instructed in literacy. But the currency that helps get you there more quickly is, does a child experience a loving space? And so, because that's what is going to expedite children learning, that has to be present for adults. Whereas I don't have the sense that that same thing is necessarily true in a business. For that reason alone, I don't particularly enjoy the analogy, but I definitely get that there are things that business can learn from schools and things that schools can learn from business.
Yeah, and it's that mindset of of a teacher and of a leader to look at how do we systemize things. You mentioned that earlier about creating systems to essentially replace yourself at some point, and having that mindset of efficiency and systems to go towards those core values, like you said, of teaching from love and developing humans, not developing an income. So it's that mindset of, as a teacher, what I do that matters most is how I interact with students on a daily basis. But how can I also look at the way we spend our time efficiently? Are we learning in the most efficient manner? And what I think is even more important for teachers is, am I spending my time most efficiently to prepare a learning environment for students to grow and thrive? Because I think that's something that teachers on a lot of levels struggle with, being efficient. You mentioned searching through Pinterest and searching through teacher pay teacher, and there are times where we spend countless hours just to find something that looks cooler, but not actually do anything to
Absolutely.
create an experience
Absolutely.
for students. And I think that is where the benefit of that business side in education can be supportive, when it is on target of the experience of students, and not, like you said, business is about income. It's about teachers thinking in that mindset to help them accomplish more with students.
And just to add to that, I think I appreciate you taking that question and answering it, especially with a beautiful answer like the currency of love, because that resonates with us. That reminds us of what it goes back to. I have a friend of mine who is a school board member, and in my dystopian perspective as a teacher, I was just like, surround ourselves with more and more and more and more. Like, we deserve it all, especially we're recording this in Teacher Appreciation Week, right? Like, just shower us with love, right? And does that automatically mean a transition to growth and positivity? And so I guess the portion that I'm intrigued by, and feel free to take this how you will, you probably come across trends that are not heading in the right direction. So how do you continue to deal with supporting teachers, admin, school boards, where trends are not always in that right direction? How do you maintain that support in a positive way when maybe that's a glaring weakness, there's a resistance in a certain area? Oh, I don't lead that way. How are you having that conversation that turns it productive?
Yeah, so this is the area I fail at frequently, so I have plenty to draw on to respond to your inquiry. I'm thinking of times where I feel like I've been most effective at that. And there's certainly a pattern here. The times when I've been most effective at supporting people in the way that you describe, one, we're crystal clear about expectations and timelines of those expectations long in advance. Like, one thing that I've definitely felt at is when I have hit people with expectations that I feel like they didn't meet, but I had never bothered to tell them that this was an expectation in advance. So how could they have known to actually calibrate around meeting it? That's not a them failure. That's a me failure. And I wish I could sit here and tell you I've never done that, but I could think as I'm replaying the video of my leadership, I could think of way too many times where I've done that, where I wasn't crystal clear. So what I generally find is when we're crystal clear, we say, hey, here is what we expect, and 90 days from now, here's what it will look like if that expectation is being fulfilled. What questions do you have? Let's talk through this. Let's get clear on this. Let's calibrate around this. And then on a regular basis, we're checking in about that. Like I said, for principals, this is a weekly conversation. For senior administrators, this is a monthly conversation. For the school board, this is a quarterly conversation. For teachers, daily. But what is the expectation that we've set far in advance, and how have we defined how we're going to check in on that, and let folks know when we don't perfectly nail it. That's fine, but let's just be clear about whether we nailed it or not. Let's be crystal clear about that, and then let's just brainstorm. It's your show, so you tell me, what do you plan to do about it, and by when, and what support do you need from me? Or if the support you need from me is ideas of how can I help you with that, great. I can bring some ideas to the table as well, but I don't want to start with assuming that you need any ideas. I want to start with the assumption that you probably can sort this out on your own, and I'm just here to facilitate this conversation. And most of the time I find that to be the case, but as I work with people longer, sometimes people are like, actually, I have no idea how to solve this problem. Can you give me some ideas? Like, oh yeah, I've got 3 or 4 ideas. I'm going to hit you with all of them. You tell me which one your wisdom leads you to believe is the right one for this situation, and then let's go with that. And so not only being super crystal clear with people well in advance, clear about how we're going to monitor progress along the way, but always clear that I trust and believe that you have everything you need to be successful here, and that I'm going to leave it to your judgment, to make whatever pivots you feel like we need to make when we notice that we're off trajectory. But I'm also completely here that if you ever want to ask for help, that I'm never going to treat that as a sign of weakness or a sign of failure, that I'm always happy to, but I'm going to pitch out ideas. It is still going to be on you to pick among those ideas. And so you are still the architect of this thing at the end of it. Even if I put some ideas out there, I'm not going to give you just one. I'm going to give you a few, and then you've got to pick from those which you think makes the most sense. So it's still you still have ownership of where this thing is going for you. Whether it be in your boardroom, in your central office, in your principal office, or in the classroom. And so when I do a better job of behaving that way, I was meeting with a group of teachers actually earlier today, specifically talking about our student-led restorative practices implementation. There was a particular area where we clearly were not where we needed to be, but we had the rubric in front of us. We were all looking. It's like, yep, this is where we know this is what we're trying to accomplish. Such as that. What do you need to do to get there? Like, what's the next step? We don't need to know the next 5 steps. Just what's the next step? And they talked through it. And they identified for themselves the next step. And then they had a couple of questions like, hey, AJ, how would you do this? Well, I got a few ideas. You could do this, this, or this. Which do y'all think makes the most sense? Okay, got it. And so we wrote that down. That's the next step. And okay, so who's going to own this and by when? Okay, got it. Excellent. All right, well, let's go try it out. We'll see what happens. And, we'll check back in next month. And that but having that type of conversation where it's not a got you, it's not about beating up on people, it's really about helping people be the best version of themselves. But in the leader role, I've got to be super disciplined about the sequence of how that conversation occurs so that people don't feel like it's a gotcha. People don't feel like they're being set up to fail.
I love it. I honestly could continue this conversation as long as possible, but I do want to be mindful of our time. So I want to transition us into our exit ticket, AJ, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1: what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student school experience better?
Yeah. So something I saw recently that I was really wanting to share with you guys on this point is I saw a teacher, and what she did with, and we'll just call him little AJ. That's always the one causing disruptions. Um, and what she did with little AJ is when he was kind of making a mess of things, in the class behavior wise, she put him in charge. It's like, hey, you're going to be responsible for making sure that this particular behavior isn't happening in our classroom, because that's just not what we do here. Like, I understand that may be what folks do elsewhere, but that's just not what we do here. Welcome to my class. And so now you're going to be responsible for making sure this doesn't happen. And in that moment, it totally reframed it from, I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to tell you when you're good and when you're bad and all that stuff. Now all of a sudden, little AJ's in charge. And people are like, how is this going to work out? Like, this is not good. This is not a good look. Like, we cannot rely on little AJ to. And I'll tell you, by the end of the year, it's not that little AJ got everything perfect, but there is a shift that happened in that child when it goes from, we are here to police you, to we're here to allow your greatness. And so that is something that it just resonates for me. When I see folks have the presence of mind, because I know when little AJ's acting out, like, I'm immediately triggered. I just want, like, little AJ, sit down, But seeing a teacher have the presence of mind not to go there, but instead using his opportunities, like, I'm going to pull you into greatness, no matter what it takes. And now I'm going to let you be responsible in this classroom for making sure that the greatness that I expect out of you is the greatness that you now expect out of everyone. Like, that's just it's a powerful thing to see, kind of like that almost instantaneous switch when a conversation like that really connects. Yeah, it's a whole game changer. Yeah, that one's a little more pedestrian. Is I just need to shut up, listen, and let people solve their own problems. There's all too often where I screw things up by trying to be the fixer with all the answers, and I basically never have the answer. Like, the closest I come to having really great answers is when people have struggled to come up with their own, and they authentically ask me, hey, can you give me some ideas? And then all of a sudden, like, I come up with ideas. I'm like, man, how did I come up with that? That's really, I'm kind of impressed by the idea I came up with. But I think what I'm noticing is that it's because the genesis of it wasn't in me trying to perpetuate my greatness in the moment. It was me trying to be of service in the moment, and that my capacity for ideation is greater in moments of service than it is in moments of ego.
I want to reiterate that as a coach. That has been by far one of my biggest growth points, is doing that same thing of, when I'm working with a teacher, if I am there to help them with something specific, I have convinced myself after probably 6 months of not doing it, go there and do that, right? Do what they're asking for. But when you get that question of, well, what do you think? Or how would you do this? That's when they have opened
That's
the
right.
door. And that's when I will walk through it. Before, I was busting the door down, trying to, like you said, perpetuate my ideas. And the better ideas have come out when the door is open for me, because I'm not going with that mindset of, like, oh, you know what, No matter what they say, I know I can solve this with
Mm-hmm.
small group instruction, or I know I can solve this with whatever that is. And so I just want to, for any instructional coaches listening, that is by far one of the best things you can do to help not only be more
Yeah.
successful, but your relationship with the teachers you work with.
It's funny. It's actually become an unofficial motto for some of the students that I work with on leading student-led restorative practices is we do not solve problems. So this is a group of students who they will bring students together who have broken the laws and their job is to help create a space where the student takes responsibility and for the harm they create and repair the harm. But part of the mantra for those students is we do not solve problems. So when little AJ shows up because he vandalized the bathroom, our job is not to solve that he vandalized the bathroom. Our job is to create a space where he solves for the reality that he vandalized the bathroom and comes up with a plan for repairing the harm. That if I've got a group of students leading a mediation circle, as a group of student leaders, our job is not to convince these two people who are in conflict how to come back together. Our job is to create a space of connection where they solve their own conflict. And so that has become the unofficial mantra is we don't solve problems. In fact, if you want to get kicked off the student-led restorative practices team, come in here and try to solve people's problem for them. And we're going to have to let you go because that's not what we do here. We create a space in which people are given the tools and the accountability for creating solutions to their own challenges, not just spoon feeding people what we think should be the solutions.
So first off, not a pedestrian answer. Second off, Ken, it kind of clicked in my brain. Like we've interviewed a ton of people, mostly at the teaching level, right? We've had a few principals, we've had a variety of different teaching roles. But AJ, it sounds like your philosophy is the same thing we've heard from teachers, which is, go back to Maslow's hierarchy and, what is the way to have the greatest impact. It feels like in both of your roles, your job is to make someone like me as a classroom teacher, you feed me an idea and I think it's my own idea, so I own it, and you don't get any of the credit. And then eventually when I, with this great idea that wasn't my idea to begin with, come across a roadblock, that's where you step in and give that assistance. A very thankless position you guys have. I got to put it out there. Just because, you don't get to reap the benefits in the spotlight. I'll put it that way.
It's funny you say that. I had an experience. So there are folks who are open to the coaching from the very beginning and folks who are not open to the coaching from the very beginning. I'm sure you've encountered both humans. So I'm thinking of a particular person who is not at all open to the coaching at the very beginning. Not even a little bit, just completely not open to the coaching. And is now just kind of transformed into this amazing kind of coach in their own right. But I heard them visiting with some folks the other day and talked to them and took 100% credit for all of the systems that we've put in place that they were completely resistant to at the beginning. All the systems we've described on this podcast today, completely resistant to the deployment of these systems. But now, 2.5 years later, they're busy talking to them. I was like, oh yeah, I've been championing this from the beginning, and we needed to put this in place, and we did it all. This wasn't really AJ. He's been helpful to have around, but this was really us. We made all this happen. And I'm sitting. At first, my ego kicks in. Well, what are you talking about? And then a different part of me is like, actually, this is what success looks like. Like, this is exactly what it looks like to have systems that are going to stand the test of time so that when I walk out the door, they're not thinking the guy with all the ideas left. They're thinking some random guy who we don't need any more left. That's actually success. It doesn't feel like success. And so the question is, do I want my ego to win or do I want children to win? And this is one of those moments where I have to choose. So in that moment, I was like, I'm not going to correct the narrative on this. I'm going to lean into the narrative because this is what victory for children looks like. And it doesn't always feel great. And I think as leaders, we just have to accept that it's not always going to feel great because what I want is the glorification of me. And success doesn't look like that. Success looks like the glorification of the people that I served. And if I'm not comfortable with that, I probably shouldn't be in a leadership position. So it's funny because I felt that immediate tug, that desire for my own glory, my own, whatever, and having to intentionally wrestle with myself in that moment. It's like, no, don't say a word. In fact, if somebody asks you if that's the case, completely agree. It's like, yep, you know what? I'm not necessary. The thing that I agree with in that moment, they're right. I'm not necessary. This is not about me. This is about the amazing work that they've done. And just leave it at that.
We deal with that as classroom teachers. Oh, kids are going out receiving praise for working. Like, I revised that writing that you just won an award on, right? Like, we've all definitely been there. So, but again, that is the depth, and so much of us get caught up in that ego voice speaks louder than the realistic.
It's not the most beautiful part of me.
Well, and I think that's human nature, and that's again something that in education, there are very few times that you see success so blatantly obvious. Like, I think we trust success, but it's so infrequent that you see it directly in the moment that you want to absorb it. Years later, different story. So the next question is a great one. I really like this, and it really talks about how the school year tends to go in waves. There are days and weeks that we as educators struggle to survive. What is something you feel like you can share with educators to help them power up through moments of struggle?
Yeah, one of the things that I've started doing, I started this a few years back. I actually added to it today, is I created in my inbox, I call it my me file. And basically, whenever I receive an email that is just really expressing love in a way that leaves me kind of touched and inspired, that I try to remind myself, I need to add this to the me file. And so there are days when I just am frustrated and not feeling powerful, not feeling impactful, wondering, like, do I bring anything to any of this, or should I hang it all up? And I'll try to have the discipline. Well, let me go check out what the me file has to say and see. And so it's a way of kind of putting gas back in the tank. I say this is important because in the more of a leadership role you're in, the more people it is your responsibility to fill up their tank, and the fewer people who have a responsibility for filling up yours. That's just the nature of leadership. It is not healthy for me as a leader to try to get my tank filled by those for whom I have an obligation to lead. Like, it's not a healthy or fair dynamic for me to try to get my tank filled by them. It is completely healthy and appropriate for them to come and try to get their tank filled by me. And so the more responsibility, the higher your role in any hierarchy, the more cups you have to fill and the fewer jugs you have to fill it from. And so having that me file, so there's a way of kind of refilling my tank when I'm feeling a little bit low, has been an important part of me just kind of staying hyped up even when circumstances would suggest otherwise.
I love that idea. I just got an email like that today.
Save that bad boy.
I'm gonna add a folder in my email for the me file. I really like that, and that when I think about it, I've saved things like that from every student
from
that
I've
taught.
The ones
I've saved every evaluation.
Gold.
Guys, don't.
I've saved every evaluation that my students have ever completed on me. And at times I do go back and read it, especially when I was in the classroom. I would love to go back about 4 years and read. And sometimes it was to fill my cup, like you said. And other times I'd be like, oh, I remember doing that. I should do that again next week. That was fun. You kind of forget the things that you do in your classroom or as a leader and a coach. So the last one is, it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
Yeah, so this actually goes a little bit in the face of what I started off our conversation with, or at least it seems like it will, but work with me here. What I really want for all teachers is that they come in, regardless how many years of experience they come in and there's a full plan. There's a full set of instructional materials, there's lesson plans. Like, I don't want any teacher to ever have to create a lesson plan unless they just feel like they can create one that's better than the default one, and then in case do that, and then maybe that's going to become the new default one that we give to everybody when they walk in. But I don't want anyone to ever walk in empty-handed and have to create everything from scratch. I want people to have something to work with, and then let's constantly just make that 1% better every year, every year, every year, every year, and then make that available to all teachers so nobody's starting from scratch. So my actual answer to your question is the exact opposite of that, which is that sometimes I take the intentional approach of creating from nothing. That's the way I describe it, of creating from nothing, of throwing away everything that I've ever used, especially if it's something that I've done a lot over the years. That every now and then I will just throw it all out and I will start from a literal blank sheet of paper. Like, what is my intention and what can I create based on everything that I know right now? Because I will find myself reusing material over and over and over because it's gotten results, obviously. But every now and then, I actually challenge myself to start from nothing, throw out everything I've ever done, close the laptop, don't look at any resources, don't look online, just purely pulling from the depth of what my experience has been with the students I've worked with, the teachers I've worked with, and then go and create from nothing. That is the design methodology, create from nothing. That every now and then I do that as a way of really forcing myself to interrogate, am I bringing the best version of myself, or am I just bringing the most familiar version of myself? And so it's a challenging ethic to adopt because we are such creatures of habit. Like there's a lot in the way the brain works that just loves to repeat patterns because they are energetically efficient. And so pushing myself to notice in moments I have really become habituated. And the habits I've adopted may in fact be what is optimal in the circumstance. But every now and then I need to test it by taking on the task of creating from nothing, just to figure out if I can come up with something that's vastly more optimal than what I've been doing. And so that is the practice. It's a challenging practice because, again, it flies in the face of everything else I've suggested, and it flies in the face of kind of human biology and love with kind of going with the autopilot. But every now and then, I think we all need to take a place, particularly a place where we feel really strong, and say, I'm going to throw out everything and I'm going to create from nothing and see what happens.
I think it's fantastic. I think that's where we get back to our teacher instincts, and really good teachers have incredible teaching instincts, and we need to trust ourselves every once in a while. I think it's an awesome idea. Realistically, it's been a pleasure to talk with you.
This has been a lot of fun.
Well, really enjoyed it.
Y'all live up to the hype.
I can't say enough. We've had enough conversations with educators at Ken and my level, and in some ways you are in that realm, but you also have a higher calling to
I get to skip around and work at a bunch of different levels, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. With that perspective, I think that's the greatest thing is we've enjoyed hearing from your perspective with real difference makers, not that us educators at our level aren't, but your ripple effect is huge. How can our audience continue to learn from you, stay connected with you, and continue to have this perspective that you continue to share?
Yeah, well, I love the students who I get to work with each year because I'm still in the 4 high schools that I'm working with. I'm still the lead student-led restorative practices trainer, and so I'm training every single student and every single teacher in the building. And I love doing that. If any of that genre of work has sounded interesting to folks, then definitely email me about that. But I also love getting to be a support network for teachers, principals, central office staff, superintendent. And so if any of that work resonated and there's anything about what I shared, feel free to reach out. And then finally, the third piece, I love being a coach for school boards and helping them think about how can we be intentionally focused on improving student outcomes. And so any folks who are working with the school board or thinking about running for the school board, feel free to reach out for me with that. So if any of those three areas kind of resonates for folks, shoot me an email. It's just aj@ajcrabill.com, just aj@ajcrabill.com. And I'm just happy to visit with folks as people are thinking about, what's the most powerful and transformative you can be in the lives of the children you serve.
Amazing. AJ, I want to reiterate what Matt said. I've had an absolute blast. I think this has been a really good podcast for me, selfishly, just reframing a lot of the things that I'm thinking about as a coach and in my role in serving my district and how I can best support teachers. And I think there's so much commonality between what you said from the school board level all the way down to the classroom level, where all of our listeners can think about how they make those intentional decisions and choices in the way they look at situations and the way they approach situations with their teachers or with their students, depending on their position, and how to just get the best out of education for our students. So thank you so much for joining us. And I encourage our audience to reach out to you. I'll link up to your email in our show notes, which can be found wherever you're listening or watching, or on our website at powereduup.com. So AJ, thank you again. And Matt, why don't you shut us on that?
Thank you, guys.
All right, as we power down this episode, without question, AJ, you left us feeling powered up. Thank you for your time. And everyone, we look forward to the conversation next week. Talk to you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.